Welcome to the Holidays to Switzerland Travel Podcast. Your host is the founder of HolidaysToSwitzerland.com and the Switzerland Travel Planning Facebook group, Carolyn Schonefinger. On this podcast, you'll be joined by a variety of guests who share their knowledge and love of the country to help you plan your dream trip to Switzerland.
Thanks for joining me on episode 5 of the Holidays to Switzerland Travel Podcast. If you're planning a trip to Switzerland, chances are you've heard of the train excursion to the Jungfraujoch whilst doing your trip research. It's one of the most famous mountain excursions in Switzerland, and possibly the world, and it's the number one attraction of the Jungfrau Region. I've been fortunate to visit Jungfraujoch on a few occasions, and it really is an incredible experience. It's one that you'll remember forever, so it's definitely worth considering including it in your travel plans. Today's guest is going to tell us more about the day trip to the Jungfraujoch, as well as some of the other mountain excursions in the region. Now don't forget you can find the show notes from today's episode with links to additional information at holidaystoswitzerland.com/episode 5. You can also get comprehensive information on the different rail passes available for travel in the Jungfrau region, including the Jungfrau Travel Pass, in my ebook, and I'll share a link to it in the show notes too. I hope you enjoy learning all about the Jungfrau Railways. Hi, welcome to today's episode of the Holidays to Switzerland Travel Podcast. Today we're going to be talking all about the Jungfrau Railways, and my special guest today is Dario Gross, who is the sales manager for the company. Welcome, Dario. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Caroline. Thanks for inviting me.
You're very welcome. Now, it must be wonderful working for a company that owns some of the most spectacular railways, not only in Switzerland, but in the whole world. What can you tell us about Jungfrau Railways and its history?
Yeah, the Jungfrau Railways, it grew a lot, during the last century. I say century because all started in the 1800s. A rich businessman called Adolf Gier-Zeller, he had the vision to build a railway track from Kleine Scheidegg to Mount Jungfrau. So he, applied for the concession at the government at 1893, and 3 years later they started the constructing. So that was a major step for the whole project, for the whole Jungfrau Railways. That's when everything started. And 1896 they started to build the Jungfrau railway track to Mount Jungfrau. And they finished 16 years later, but not on Mount Jungfrau. They finished actually on Jungfraujoch, known today as Jungfraujoch, top of Europe. So that's just because the money ran out, and they couldn't reach quite the Jungfrau. But the Jungfraujoch, top of Europe, as we know it today, is as spectacular and amazing. And as still today, it's the top of Europe, meaning it's the highest railway station in Europe.
And it's pretty hard to comprehend, I think, that they managed all that amazing engineering all those years ago without the technology and some of the equipment that we have today.
Yeah, it's a very good point, Caroline. They had to dig a tunnel. So the whole routing is distance of 9 kilometers, and 7 kilometers of those 9 kilometers is tunnel. So they had to dig with very primitive tools, basically. They used a bit of dynamite, but not as we know it today. But mostly it was, handwork. And if you come here and you see this big rock of Eiger where the tunnel mostly goes through, it's hardly to believe that they did that. And it's amazing. It's a pioneering work indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with Jungfraujoch, which is probably one of the most famous of all the Swiss mountain excursions. What can someone expect when they're planning a trip to the Jungfraujoch?
So, I always suggest to my clients to start the journey from Jungfraujoch down in Interlaken, to be exact, in Interlaken Ost. That's the first train station from the Jungfrau Railways when you come to the Jungfrau region. You take the train, and you have two possibilities. You have two routings you can choose. Either you go via Lauterbrunnen, or you go via Grindelwald to Kleine Scheidegg, the starting point, Kleine Scheidegg to the Jungfraujoch. I suggest, my personal opinion, it's a good way to go from Interlaken Ost to Lauterbrunnen and see this very beautiful and amazing Lauterbrunnen Valley in the morning when your mind is fresh. And you see those 72 waterfalls, and it's very iconic. Also through social media nowadays, the Lauterbrunnen Valley became very popular, and you have actually the best view from our trains. So you take the train up, then from Lauterbrunnen to Kleine Scheidegg, which is roughly 40 minutes train ride, and then you take the Jungfrau Railway, as I told you before, the last journey. It takes you 35 minutes to go to the top of Europe. When it started in the 1912, when they had the first train ride to the Jungfraujoch, actually, the journey took 1 hour and 15 minutes, and nowadays only 35 minutes. And when you arrive up there, you can do a self-guided tour, and the first stop is the beautiful Vantage Terrace on the top of Europe, where you see the beautiful UNESCO World Heritage and the longest glacier in Europe, the Aletsch Glacier. And you can, continue the tour. It's really easy to do, self-guided, as I mentioned. And then you go through the Alpine Sensation, which is a little museum where we tell the story about how they built the tunnel up to the Jungfraujoch. You can, go on a glacier. You have the glacier experience. There's the Lindt Swiss chocolate heaven. And if you have a bit more time, you can even, hike for 45 minutes to a alpine hut, and it's a groomed path, so you don't need like real good mountain gear, just solid shoes to reach this alpine hut, the Mönchsjoch-Hütte, which is a hidden gem.
That sounds like something really adventurous to do.
Yeah, definitely. And you have snow and ice all year long. So, now today we have 31 degrees Celsius down here in Interlaken. On the top of Europe is very cool. So it's fresh, and still there's snow all year around.
Great. Now, are reservations necessary on the trains?
It is mandatory for groups. In Switzerland, groups are considered 10 persons or more. For individuals in Switzerland and also on the Jungfrau Railways, they can hop on and hop off any train they want. They don't need to pre-reserve any trains. But we do have a bottleneck on Kleine Scheidegg to Jungfraujoch. And there, it's not mandatory for individual guests, but there you can make a reservation online on jungfrau.ch to have your guaranteed departure time, and you don't have to stand online. But just for this section.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that there's two routings to get to the Jungfraujoch at the moment, either via Lauterbrunnen or via Grindelwald. But I believe the company is building a cableway from Grindelwald, which will reduce the travel time. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's correct. So we're building, since 2017, we're building the V Cableway project, and has 8 sub-projects. And the whole project costs 500 million Swiss francs, so 500 million. And it's amazing, the big construction site you can see in Grindelwald. And it has, as I mentioned, 8 sub-projects. I just go close into 3 sub-projects. One is the Grindelwald terminal, which is, we can imagine, like a little airport where you arrive there by train, and then you buy a sub-pass, you get to this big terminal. And from there, you can either choose to go up to Mount Mannlichen, a cable car bringing you up there now today in 19 minutes. 3 years ago, or actually like last year, it was 30 minutes. Or as of 5th of December, where the project will be finished and the Eiger Express will have its maiden voyage, the Eiger Express brings you straight to the Eiger Glacier, the Eiger Glacier station, in 15 minutes. If you take the train from Grindelwald via Kleine Scheidegg to Eiger Glacier, it takes you 1 hour, and with the Eiger Express, 15 minutes, so you save a traveling time of 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
the Eiger Glacier will be the basically new getaway to the Jungfraujoch top of Europe during the whole year. And in winter, of course, you're going to be way faster on the slopes as well, because in winter, all this becomes the Jungfrau ski region.
Sure. Now, as well as the Jungfraujoch, what are the other railways in the company's portfolio?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. So I mentioned how everything started with the Jungfrau Railways holding. Nowadays, we have more than 9 companies actually consisting the Jungfrau Railways holding. There is as well the First Cableway. Mm-hmm. That's a cableway which brings you from Grindelwald to Mount First. Grindelwald First Top of Adventure, we call it. There is, if you take the train from Wilderswil to Schienigerplatte, that's top of Swiss tradition, Hardercon top of Interlaken, a funicular ride from Interlaken to the house mountain, we call it in Interlaken, Harderkolm, top of Interlaken. And all these different mountain excursions, they just go beside the Jungfraujoch, top of Europe. So you should, when you come to the region, yes, go to the top of Europe and do the other mountains, because on every mountain there's something, else to see. Every mountain has its speciality, to put it that way.
Exactly. Yeah. And you mentioned the Schiniger Platte. It has the Alpine Garden, for instance, and at First you've got all those adventure activities, the fire and the glider and so forth. So
that's correct. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and the Schiniger Platte is a good example. We have an Alpine garden with 650 different Alpine flowers, and among them, of course, the Edelweiss. So, we really try to portray the top of Swiss tradition there. We also, every train which arrives on Schiniger Platte between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. is welcomed by Alphorn players.
Yeah, and that's a sound that you never forget. It's beautiful.
That's correct. And yeah, also on Grindelwald First, the different adventure activities you mentioned, you have the First Cliff Walk, which is, free of charge, accessible for everyone. You get beautiful pictures from up there. We have the zip lines, the First Glider and the First Flyer. We have mountain cars, we have scooter bikes, but there's also a hiking Eldorado. One of the top hotspots is the Lake Bachalp, which is a beautiful alpine lake.
Plenty to do in the region, that's
for sure. For sure.
Now, for those who are coming and going to spend a few days in the region, there's a Jungfrau travel pass available. Can you tell us how that works and what that covers?
Yeah. So the Jungfrau Travel Pass you can get as of 3 days, 3 consecutive days, up to 8 consecutive days. So if, we have guests here which stay 2-3 nights in the Jungfrau region or in the Interlaken holiday region, it makes definitely sense to get the Jungfrau Travel Pass, because then all those mountain excursions which I just mentioned are included. The Grindelwald First, Schiniger Platte and Harderkolm are included. And you get a very good deal to the top of Europe. You only pay 69 Swiss francs additional to the Jungfrau Travel Pass, and then the Jungfraujoch top of Europe is also included. If you get the pass as of 5 days, 5 consecutive days, even the boats are included on Lake Brienz and Lake Thun. So for guests who come here to the region for 2-3 nights, as I mentioned, this is definitely a good pass to get.
So, yeah, it's very economical for them to do more than one excursion.
For sure, exactly.
Okay, now, are all the railways and cableways open all year round?
That's a good question, Caroline. So, yeah, the Jungfrau top of Europe is open 365 days. And the Schiniger Platte and the Harderkolm, they are closed during winter. And Grindelwald First becomes a ski region. So it's Ski Eldorado on Mount First. So this is also open almost 365 days. It's closed for maintenance in November, but opens then for the ski season.
Okay. So even if you're visiting in winter, you can still do the Jungfraujoch excursion.
That's correct.
Excellent. But we can't leave without asking you, what are your top tips for someone visiting the Jungfrau region?
My top tips is, of course, visiting the Jungfraujoch top of Europe. Why don't you want to be on the highest railway station in Europe on almost 3,500 meters or 11,000 feet? This will approximately take you for sure half a day with the journey to, enjoy the whole scenery. And then when you come back to Interlaken, stroll around the city of Interlaken, which has a beautiful park in the middle of the town. And then, around when it gets to dinner time, you should definitely go to Harderkolm and have a dinner up there. And Harderkolm has evening departures. The last funicular down to Interlaken goes at 9:40 p.m. So enough time to end this beautiful day with a glass of wine, or, they have the coldest beer in Interlaken, which is true actually. And the food, the kitchen is great. You get, traditional Swiss food, as for example, fondue or other schnitzel or other great dishes as well. So this is how I would, plan one day.
And I bet you get wonderful views also.
Yeah, definitely. The view from Harderkolm on the platform, you can see Lake Thun, you can see Lake Brienz, you see Interlaken below you, and you can see in the backdrop Eigermönch and Jungfrau, the majestic three mountains here in the Bernese Oberland. And, it's only an 8 minutes funicular ride from Interlaken, so it's quickly done.
Wonderful. Well, I, for one, can't wait to get back to the region, that's for sure. So thank you very much for spending time with us today and answering all those questions. And I'm sure that all the listeners will be ready to book their trip to the Jungfrau region as soon as possible.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much again for inviting me, and take care and stay sane, Caroline.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. For more great resources on planning a trip to Switzerland, make sure you visit holidaysto-switzerland.com, where you'll find trip planning tips, destination guides, information on transport, including Swiss rail passes, and much more. You're also encouraged to join the Switzerland Travel Planning Group on Facebook, where you can ask questions and chat to other past and future travellers to Switzerland. You'll find show notes from today's episode at holidaysto-switzerland.com/podcast, and be sure to subscribe to the Holidays to Switzerland Travel Podcast so you never miss an episode.